this event that's taking place this day. God's blessing upon everybody. And we thank everybody for taking the opportunity in order to participate in watching this event. And we know that we're going to get into some subjects that are pertinent to the minds of people on this day, especially things that have been happening in the past few weeks. Even though we're in an age of a pandemic, there's a lot of things happening during this time while everybody is not distracted. So at this time, we have a panel of distinguished guests. I will give them a brief opportunity to introduce themselves just now. But for those that are tuning in, once again, we're talking about the cancel culture and whether it's beneficial or detrimental to the overall movements that are happening within our community. So once again, just thanking everyone for participating in the opportunity to be here this day with this panel. And once again, I'm gonna allow the panel to introduce themselves briefly before we continue on with our discussion. And I will start with Rabbi Shlomo.
Shalom L'chol. I am Rabbi Shlomo Levi. I'm the spiritual leader of Beth Elohim Hebrew Congregation in St. Albans, Queens, and I am the president of the International Israelite Board of Rabbis.
Next, I will go down the line and I'll allow Moreh Yiftach Ben Dan to introduce himself.
Peace and blessings to everybody. Short, sweet, and simple. Moreh Yiftach Ben Dan.
Next, I will go down the line and allow Zakar Ben Dan to introduce himself.
Peace to all, shalom, and also Zakar Ben Dan, thanking God for life, strength, food, clothing, and shelter, thanking him that he blessed you guys to allow you guys to join us, and hopefully the message and the information that we bring forth will be beneficial to us all in the end, that the Creator might be praised.
And then next, going down the line, Chief Naftali Ben Dan.
Hallelujah. All praise to the Most High. Chief Naftali Ben Dan, member of Congregation DCB, also member of Zadik. Thanking the Most High God for allowing us to be here today in health and in strength to give a needed message to God's people. Hallelujah.
Hallelujah.
So before we get right into it, cancel culture. So once again, that's what we're discussing today, cancel culture, something that pretty much came in the news recently, probably more towards the beginning of this year, where for those that are unaware of the concept of the cancel culture, is where someone or a group may have said something that is derogatory or offensive to another individual or another group, and basically it solicits the culture of everybody to cancel out. They're using the word cancel, but it's basically boycotting those individuals or those groups. So specifically today with the cancel culture, we're going to be talking about primarily what's been happening in the news in the past month with Nick Cannon, which is most recent, Ice Cube, Deshaun Jackson. So all of these figures in entertainment and sports have been making comments on their Twitter and Instagram pages recently. So we just want to pose questions to the panel in regards to this cancel culture, and once again, is it beneficial or is it detrimental? And with the questions that are going to be asked, at first, we're just going to allow any of the panelists to jump in, but as we go on with the flow, then certain individuals be called upon to answer certain questions. So once again, starting with what's been happening recently with Deshaun Jackson, Ice Cube, and Nick Cannon. Now, they were accused of anti-Semitic tweets and conversations. So now, posing this question to the panel, can each of you address the circumstances surrounding the posts that they've been making? And I will start with Rabbi Shalom in regards to that question. So you could pick either one of those figures, Deshaun Jackson, Ice Cube, Nick Cannon, and just briefly, so that the audience will also be aware of what the circumstances are around the tweets that, or the posts that they have been making recently.
Okay. As to the first point of cancel culture, right? I think generally there's the principle of free speech, and people should be allowed to express their thoughts and opinions and views, whatever they are, even if they are offensive. This is, an important right that we have in a free society that's very important to us. So I do believe, in dialogue and free expression of ideas, and that's important. On the other hand, because you have free speech doesn't mean you have a right to speak everywhere. So I have a right to my own opinion. That doesn't mean I have a right to my own TV show. It doesn't mean I have a right to have my opinions in the New York Times or to have my opinion on CNN. Those are, private companies, and they're allowed to have who they want on them. Just as we're having our program this evening for the benefit of our community, and we choose our guests and who we want and don't want to have a forum on this panel. That's also our right. And so what I'm hoping for is that we have consistent moral standards, right? And that we could agree on that there are lines and that people have choices and rights, and companies and businesses have rights. The final example I'll give is I remember a few years ago when the radio host Don Imus, who was a popular personality on the radio, made very derogatory comments about Black women on a basketball team, right? Talked about their hair and compared them to the white female athletes. And the Black community was outraged and demanded that he be taken off the air, and indeed he lost his show on MSNBC. And the same thing with Dr. Laura, who used to have a popular show, and she used the N-word on the air, and then she was taken off. And similarly here in the area of Pennsylvania where I live, this was a local high school girls basketball game, and the person calling the game at the beginning, when he calls out the names of all the players, made comments about the names of the Black girls who have very Afrocentric names, and rather than just saying player 32 and their name, make comments about what their names sound like. And people here, were upset and demanded that he not be allowed to call games in the future because of the comments that he made. So if we would be upset when people make racist, as they have often done over the years, racist comments about Black people, and we demand consequences, we demand that they be fired or removed from that, then we have to be consistent and saying it's not just when someone makes a comment about my group that I get upset, but either we allow everyone to make these things, or no one to be able to make offensive comments. And that would be my opening statement.
Okay, so now I'm gonna go down the line and I'm gonna ask Chief Nathalie Bendan. So once again, in regards to the recent comments from, and you can focus on Nick Cannon since that was the most recent controversy, but whether it's Ice Cube or Deshaun Jackson, just your thoughts on the surrounding material with that.
Excuse me. Obviously, everybody kind of knows what happened around Nick Cannon because that's new news. But Deshaun Jackson, I know a little bit about what his comments were, and I did some research on Ice Cube's more or less post that he put out. And some of the clarity that has to happen is defining what anti-Semitism is. I think that when you go and take an approach where someone takes information, puts it out there, I think you shouldn't just blanketly cancel or attack. I think you just have to combat it with better knowledge, right? I think it's not just a matter of them saying, well, you're an anti-Semite because you said X, Y, and Z, but you actually have to prove where they were going wrong in their speech. If Nick Cannon says that Blacks are the original Israelites, he has the right to that opinion if he can provide evidence of that nature. If Ice Cube said the same thing, he has the right to say that if he can provide evidence of that. If they're saying things about individual Jews who did corrupt things to the Black community, if they have evidence towards it, they have the right to speak it because it's truth. If you have information, or if the Jewish community has information to say, well, that's not accurate, that's not true, then they have the right to counter that. I think what happens is we may not always know the best way to express ourselves, and that's what causes the controversy. But you have to understand, as marginalized people, sometimes we look at all of what was done to us by every ethnic group, and we talk on it. We speak on it. Whether it's fact, whether it's conspiracy, whether we have evidence or not, we have these discussions because it's been years of victimization. So we want to make sure, at least on our side, that if anything is spoken, there's some clarity to it. So sometimes it's just a matter of not shutting down voices, but making sure that they have the right facts. I believe that it would be best, my brother Uzael just said the other day, if Nick Cannon had a Black rabbi or Israelite teacher by his side when he was making the statements, then he can be steered in the right direction without being accused of blanket anti-Semitism. The same thing with Ice Cube. If he had these people behind him to see, well, this is where you're going right, and this is where you're going wrong. This is factual, this is conspiracy, then it can clarify a lot of things, because oftentimes they will accuse you of anti-Semitism if you're speaking the truth, if you're being honest, and if you're being factual. So we want to make sure that we protect ourselves against that those blanket accusations by making sure that we can provide facts that are evident, like facts. There's accusations against people because they talked about the Jewish contribution to slavery, but there were Jews that had slaves. There were Jews that fought on the side of the Confederacy. This is facts. You can't dispute facts. So when these facts come up, let them be known. And if there's anything to counter those facts, then that's the difference. Then if you have the facts, there were Jews that supported Dr. King. There were Jews that founded the NAACP. So those are facts. So this comes where we have to make sure that evidence, when we speak or we tweet, because remember those things, once you put them up there, even if you take them down, they were still posted and still said, that everything that we say from our community comes from a fact-based point of view, and that we should reach out to a lot of our brothers and sisters when they do make statements to make sure that they have the support, because they may get a lot of heat from making certain statements that are actually factual.
So what I want to do right now, because Rabbi Shlomo made some references of some things that happened on the flip side. So just more specifically, back in around November, December of last year, now there were many groups, primarily Jewish groups, that requested that Stephen Miller be removed as a White House advisor. Once again, because that's due to his ties, with white supremacist groups, and also some what they would call anti-Semitic rhetoric. So I'll pose this question to Samal Zakar Ben Dan. So now, when people tried to get Stephen Miller fired, that didn't happen. So why is this type of pressure effective on some people and not others? Because once again, we just heard about Nick Cannon and his firing, but with Stephen Miller, basically nothing happened. So in your opinion, why does the pressure not work for everybody?
Thanking God for life. I appreciate the forum, and I appreciate the comments that were made thus far. What I will say to speak to that is, I'm going to jump back and I'm going to touch on Nick Cannon just for a moment. And I'm going to touch on Ice Cube just for a moment. So Nick Cannon made the statement that he made. They never really determined what actually was a part of his statement, which was anti-Semitic. They just kind of took the general statement and labeled it anti-Semitic. Ice Cube, same thing. One of the differences between Nick Cannon and Ice Cube is that Nick Cannon made his statement, and shortly thereafter, Nick Cannon apologized. Ice Cube made his statement, he made his post, and he stood firm on his post, and he is still standing firm on his post until this current moment. The difference between the Nick Cannons and the Ice Cubes, now I want to say, for a matter of reference, when you're a celebrity, what happens is you take on certain responsibility as a celebrity. So when you take on that responsibility to speak, you need to be prepared to bear the burden of what's going to come along with your speech, which is what Rabbi Shlomo mentioned. So now to speak to Nick Cannon and Ice Cube versus Stephen Miller, the biggest difference is they spoke out. The Jewish community spoke out. Jewish Democrats spoke out. Regular Democrats spoke out. A variety of different factions spoke out against it and asked for him to be removed. And the support that Stephen Miller received was that we're going to stand behind him, and therefore him having that support system, they, regardless to whatever political pressure was available, that support system that he had did not fold to all of the criticisms that were out there. And I think that that's the major difference. When we have these, when we have our speakers who speak out, such as a Nick Cannon, people were ready to go behind Nick Cannon for support. Unfortunately for Nick Cannon, or unfortunately for the people who took on the cause that Nick Cannon raised himself, unfortunately for them, Nick Cannon apologized before they were able to offer that support. The difference being the support. When we have these people who speak out one way or the other, because just like Rabbi Shlomo said, we all have free speech, and we need to be careful with the freedom that we use. However, we need to learn how to support when our community speaks out, and when our community speaks out right. I don't want to go into the various conspiracy theories about why Stephen Miller was, why his was a little bit more palatable than Nick Cannon's or Ice Cube's, because that's an entirely different issue. But I am going to say it all goes down to support. So when we have someone who speaks right, when we have someone who speaks up, we need to support them. And that's something that has been missing in our community for a very long time. And that's something that if we want people to continue to speak for us and speak to us, we're going to need to be able to provide that support once those statements are made. And because that's what Stephen Miller got. And that's why Stephen Miller is still a White House advisor, even though they have found numerous emails to show that he was a white supremacist and had made many anti-Semitic comments. It all comes down to support.
And so we've been talking a lot indirectly about anti-Semitism in regards to various cultures, Black and white. So obviously, anti-Semitism is a problem worldwide, regardless of who's making the comments. So now I will ask for Tamora Yiftach, why do you believe that anti-Semitism is such a sensitive topic?
Thank you for the question, Rabbi Binyamin. It's sensitive because of what happened to them in history. And rightfully so, there should be some type of feelings concerning what happened to Jewish people in history. Any type of atrocity of that nature would be sensitive to people. As a quote unquote African American, as a black man, when people talk about slavery and if people speak against slavery or people speak that slavery was okay or what happened during slavery, then yeah, I would be upset. The question that we have to ask ourselves is, when these individuals make these statements, is it really an anti-Semitic statement, or are they exercising their free speech? And a lot of times we don't look at the meat of what they're saying. They just stop and they say, who is this attributed to? Or is this against us? And this type of problem has been happening for centuries now. This is not a new problem. Whenever we come up and we say the black people are the true children of Israel, the black people are the Hebrews, immediately with ferocity, they come out and they say, oh, an anti-Semitic statement has been made. They get on the media, they go through the Anti-Defamation League and things of that nature, and they say, why are they stating these things? And we have to ask ourselves the question, why is, soon as the question is broached about who the children of Israel really are, or is it possible, is it just simply possible that the African American, the black man, the quote unquote Negro, is the true children of Israel? Automatically it's met as anti-Semitism. And so I think that, in my opinion, Nick Cannon, Ice Cube, Deshaun Jackson, although these people do not outwardly profess to be Israel, although these people do not outwardly profess to be Hebrews, they are using their platform to open up dialogue on what they consider to be truth. Now, obviously, there are some people who do not agree that Jewish people are the people that they're speaking of in the book. And if that is an opinion of people, then dialogue should be able to be opened for people to state their facts and say what it is, as opposed to it always being related to anti-Semitism, take their job away, take their money away, get them out of media, unless they're afraid that something may come out that they don't want the world to hear.
So the next question I'm going to ask, and I'll actually shoot this to Chief Naftali, being that he has somewhat ties to entertainment, media, and things of that sort. So I just want to ask, what role do you feel that media plays in exacerbating all of these situations that are happening now? Or does the media play a role in what's happening in regards to anti-Semitism, the comments that are being made? Do you think that they're pushing the envelope? Do you think that they're responsible for blowing things out of proportion? Overall, just in your opinion, what role do you feel that the media plays in all of this?
The media can be your best friend and your worst enemy. The role that the media is currently playing in a lot of this is taking an approach that kind of takes away from fact. A lot of times when you watch a news program, they're giving you a synopsis or a highlight of situations. They may not give you the in-depth background. They may not give you the history behind a lot of stuff that's being said or even being seen. So you just have to take what they give you at face value. And a lot of the conversations that we're having concerning Deshaun Jackson, Ice Cube, Nick Cannon, Minister Farrakhan, they're not giving you the backdrop, right? They're not giving you the information in its pure context. Information in its pure context, in my opinion, is why are they making these statements? Why are marginalized and oppressed people discussing them being oppressed by another ethnic group, even though that ethnic group may have been marginalized? Are we being exploited? Are we being taken advantage of? And it's more of a question than, to me, anti-Semitism or statements of anger. What the media may do is just concentrate on the fact that, oh, this person made this statement, and the statement is anti-Semitic. No, they made this statement because of this history. They made this statement because of exploitation of Black people in the music industry, or exploitation of people in in Hollywood, or exploitation of Black people concerning housing discrimination, concerning bank loans, whatever the case may be. They make the statements because there has been a history of conflict or oppression with that group. They may not have the full discussion behind it or the reason why, but sometimes the focus is just about what the statement was. So we, as a community, we have to make sure we have more forums like this, because this allows us to dig deeper into the reasons why these things are being said, the reason why the statements are being made, the reason why Nick Cannon said what he said, you know, the reason why he apologized, you know, and it gives the sense of, if you don't play by our rule book, we will shut you down. If you don't play by and this is the media, if you don't play by our rule book, we'll shut you down. We will allow you to say this, we will allow you to say that, but if you make this statement, then you're going too far. But if the statement is based on facts, if it's based on truth, if it's something that's undeniable and is evidence-based, then why can't we speak it? And there's often times where there are things that are done, because the government is very tricky. The government will, you know, they'll shut down the Black Panther Party, but then, you know, you'll have gangs on rap videos. It's different. So we want to make sure that we as a community can have more control over the viewpoints that we express to the public. The media, when the media control has the control over all of our statements, or they can spin the things that may have been said and label it hate, there's a problem, right? Because one thing I read that Ice Cube said is, I'm expressing my truth, right? Like I said before, everything that you say, if it's truth, it has to be verifiable and has to be fact-based. So that's what I believe. But at the same time, you know, if he's expressing his truth and he's willing to get into anything, a debate or some intellectual contest with anybody to prove his facts, then I'm all with it. But we just have to make sure that we protect ourselves from the media, because the media can be very, very, very harmful.
So for Rabbi Shalom, because in your opening statements, you mentioned free speech.
Right.
And we've been, everybody's been discussing free speech in regards to various people. So now, in your opinion, how can one convey, you know, controversial thoughts, whether it's anti-Semitism, anything else, any controversial thoughts or beliefs, without being persecuted for it, as opposed to the right of free speech?
I think there should be consequences, and words are powerful, right? And you have to use them responsibly. And the Torah speaks to us, right? As several of my colleagues on this panel mentioned, a lot of the people we're talking about, whether it's Nick Cannon or Deshaun Jackson, don't necessarily identify as Israelites the way that we do, right? So what I observe is going on is people are appropriating aspects of our culture to make another point, right? So they're talking about us and using our history, but that they are not us. They don't express a desire to be us. They are using our history for a certain purpose, and we have to be very clear and very specific. Now, I took the time to listen to the whole interview, which was then taken down. Nick Cannon took it down, so you can't listen to it now. But there are transcripts, and fortunately, I did make a copy of it before it was taken down. And hopefully, the version of this that is put on YouTube will actually have the quotes, because when you look at the interview, there are certain parts of it that were not anti-Semitic. Certain things that he said that I think we would all agree with, such as when he says that the Hebrews or the Israelites were Black people. Well, this is something we have been teaching for over 100 years. And that would be a factual statement if your definition of Blackness is by today's standard, right? We're understanding that they didn't think of themselves as Black, but we live in a racist society that defines people by color. And if you were to use the same standards that we use today to define race and apply that to all the people of the Bible, by that definition, they would be Black. And so that is absolutely true. And he would be totally justified in saying that. I don't think that's the part that I found, and a lot of people found to be anti-Semitic. In Nick Cannon's case, when he went on from there to say, and white people are like animals, that there is something wrong with their skin. And specifically, he then went into this theory that they don't have enough melanin in their skin. And then to say, because of where they come from in Europe, this causes them to act like animals, right? And to lack compassion. That's where he went into racist and anti-Semitic territory. And
so hold your thought right there.
Right.
So like he said those comments, but as you said in the earlier, like free speech is in this country.
Right.
So whether the statements are factual or his opinion, should he, as well as everyone else, because you mentioned, the announcer at the basketball game, you mentioned different things.
Right.
Doesn't everybody have the right to free speech? So why are they getting persecuted for just exercising their free speech? Minus the fact of things being opinion versus factual at this time. We talk about free speech right now. Why are they getting persecuted for using free speech? And is there a way that people in general could avoid being persecuted for exercising their right to free speech?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily call it persecution, right? I think there's consequences and there is responsibility and there is accountability, right? And so, the other point that I wanted to make on this subject, right, about that is the Torah says in the book of Exodus, 23rd chapter, the 9th verse, you shall not oppress a stranger, for you know the feelings of a stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. And what God is telling the children of Israel, the true Israelites, right, is that when you get into your own land and you come into this land and now you are in power, right, you should not oppress the strangers who live in your land, because you remember what it was like to be a stranger in somebody else's land, right? So because the way we were treated in Egypt, that should instill in us a certain understanding and sensitivity. And so I would say to this particular point we're talking about today, a people who for 500 years have had people tell them there's something wrong with their skin. There's something wrong with the way you look because of the color of your skin, right? If you have been a people, I don't know any other people who could say they've experienced that like we have. If you have been a people who have had people say there's something wrong with your skin, you should be the last person to say that someone else's skin is not the way it should be because they have too much or not enough melanin, right? Black people should be the last people to be racist. And this is what the Torah tells us, and this is why we are Israelites. We studied the Torah. God told us, you know what it's like to be a stranger. You more than anybody else know what it's like to be a stranger. And so therefore, you should not, when you get in your land, start discriminating against people, being biased and prejudiced and racist against them because you learned from your experience. And so this is, where Nick Cannon got himself in trouble. And I think that is those comments and those statements that upset the most people, is those comments and statements that he can't defend factually. If he had just said Israelites, then he would have a factual basis to make his claim. But when you start talking about melanin madness, that's just bad science, it's bad history, it's racist, it's anti-Semitic, it's indefensible, and then you have to suffer, the consequences of that, I think. So, I'll just stop there for a moment.
So we're gonna shift gears a little bit. As Rabbi Shlomo mentioned some of America's history and slavery, instituting slavery and racism. So I'm going to ask this question to Zakar and Don. Based on what's been happening lately, America has been removing historical monuments. There's been a push, or further push, for the removal of historical monuments, Confederate flags, and any signs of racism. There's a bridge down south that's named after a slave owner that people are trying to get that name off of. More recently, like in the NFL, the owner finally said that they'll change the name from Redskins. They still picking a new name. So overall, in your opinion, will this make an impact in, quelling some of the tensions and the protests and everything that's been happening, in the past few months?
The short answer to that is no. And the reason that that's not going to make an impact is because that's not the issue. The issue is not whether or not a statue is raised or taken down or is visible. The issue is within the individuals who are causing the harm and the damage to our community. That's where the issue becomes. A lot of this is, my brother Morey Yiftach talked about information and putting information out there. So I dare say that if they made this agreement to start to remove these Confederate flags and these statues and so on and so forth. And so as they're starting to remove them, the first thing that I think is important to note is look at the anger in which some people are responding to the removal of that. That lets you know that this isn't about a statue. This is about what's inbred in a lot of people. It's inbred hate. So I'm just going to kind of speak to this and I'm just going to let it go. Slavery was a very interesting thing. Slavery came about, slavery was existent. And after a while, because people in this country were also Christian, they were also religious. So as slavery began to become more harsh, people would look at it and they would compare the harshness in which oppressors afflicted slaves, and they would compare that to some of the religious writings in the Bible. And then they started to kind of step back and say, well, wait a minute, how can we treat this people this way? And yet we say our God is all love. And so now they needed to reconcile between those two concepts. And one of the biggest things that they did to reconcile between those two concepts was they started to put out this propaganda to indicate that, well, slavery is okay because they're just Black people. Slavery is okay because it was ordained by God. And that's what they did. That's the propaganda that they put out in order to justify the savage acts that they were doing. And I use the word savage in relating it back to Nick Cannon, because I agree. Part of Nick Cannon's comments were misguided. They were definitely misguided. That does not change the fact that there were some savage acts that happened. And over the last 500 years, the savage acts occurred. And now they're trying to pacify those savage acts, not with an apology, not with a genuine love to try to repair all of the damage that was caused by the propaganda or those acts. They're just trying to come up with this, well, we're going to remove the statue of what this represents, but you're not removing it. You're not changing all of the damage that was caused by the oppression that came along with it. So with that being said, my answer is no. It's not going to change, because right now people don't want, they can care two bits about a statue. They want to be considered human. And that's the part that's missing. That's what's not being brought forth.
Now, ask Morey Yiftach, as people are trying to make these or attempting to remove monuments, change names on, as I just mentioned, bridges, streets, you know, government buildings. You know, what happens when these monuments and these name changes aren't done? And does it affect the overall movement of trying to eradicate racism in this country when these monuments are not removed?
Yes and no. And I don't want to sound like I'm speaking in like duplicity here, but here's a reality. The fact that they felt that a monument needed to be put up lets you know that they wanted people to see something about this individual and what they did, that they felt it was an important part of history. So the same way that they felt that the monument should go up so that people could memorialize what these people have done in history, is the same way that our children and our people should see that this monument was removed because it doesn't represent something correct in history, and that is something that should be changed. Now, I want us to understand this for who we are as a people. We have long time allowed people to disrespect us, to memorialize what they have done against us, and to only apologize through saying, but not through action. And here in 2020, it is time for things to change, not only through word, but also through action. They kill our people constantly on a day-to-day basis, and there's no change made, or there's little change made. Yet, change is made when our people say something in their mind against their people. Something needs to change immediately. Jobs are lost. There's financial implications. There is, how dare you say this, or how dare you think this about certain people when you should know better? And my question is, while you're stopping and you're saying everybody should know better, when is the point that comes that you should know better? That your 400 years of history begins to become repaired? That you show that through reparations, you're sorry for what you've done? That there's a public apology to a nation of people of what happened to them, of the atrocities that's going on, that would stop and say, okay, they want the healing process to come alive. But no, all I see through the same media, you play constantly how my brothers and sisters are being shot and killed on the street. Breonna Taylor's murderers are still walking around free till this day. And for that, I say yes, those monuments should come down. Those statues should come down. Those men who have perpetuated slavery and actually built this country off of slavery, those people shouldn't be memorialized. Those people should be taken out of history books. The same way you want the comments that people make taken out of history books is the same way that those individuals who have perpetuated atrocities against our people, they should be removed also. I mean, Darwin's theory on evolution stops and says, we have evolved from animals, which any of the people on this panel subscribe to, yet it's still taught in school. Why is that? Because it's accepted that that's his opinion. Yet, when Black people come with their opinion, when Black people have a version of events on their platform, I could even get with, we're not allowing this on our platform. But when they come with it on their platform, on something that's supposed to be free speech, that now all of a sudden we're looked into as, oh, is this hate speech? Or is this something that's purposely being said to make a certain people look in a certain light? Then yes, I absolutely have a problem with it. Science backs up that a lack of melanin is a genetic defect. I didn't come up with that. I learned that in school from their textbooks. And so when that happens, do I say, are there some people who may not be as articulate or can explain their point as well? Yeah, of course. Everybody makes missteps and everybody makes mistakes. I think the brother should have been allowed. The brother should have been allowed to clarify his point, as opposed to, no, you have to go out there and apologize, or we're saddened by his comments. Because the reality is that now he's being looked at in a negative light in spite of the fact of not being able to clarify his comments, and we don't know what that effect will be in the long range term of his income or his space in the society.
I just want to shoot it before I was going to switch gears real quick just now, but I just want to keep it on the same subject, turn it back to Zakar Bendan and talking about the monuments. And is this a proper approach towards racism, and any opinion that you have on that?
I'm sorry, can you just repeat that question, please?
Yeah, I'm just going back to the monuments and the removal of monuments, and how far does this process need to go in order to have an effect on racism, and just any other opinions or thoughts that you have in regards to this subject?
Well, I'll simply say, again, I hear my brother Maury Yefta. I think you can take them all down, and I agree. You know what? Take them all down. But I think as far as you want to take it, I don't think that it's going to make much of a difference, because you still need the people who have these feelings. Derek Chauvin, who stood on that man's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, was going to stand on his neck whether statues were up or not. So what I will say is this: if we're talking about making a meaningful change, one of the things that we need to do is now we need to look back at equity, right? And all things being equal. And one of the things that need to be considered is the same punishment or backlash that a Nick Cannon gets for making the statements that he made is the same punishment and backlash that a Don Imus should get. Now, I know Don Imus got off the radio for a little while, but Don Imus was put back on the radio. And so what I'm going to say is I go back to our conversation about support. The same thing I'll just mention about Arsenio Hall. Arsenio Hall was taken off because he gave Minister Farrakhan the ability to voice his opinion on the media and some of those things. And Arsenio Hall has been taken off the air and has not been back on since. So we need to do the same thing. And so when I go back to support, I simply say, I understand Nick Cannon apologized. I read his apology, every paragraph of it, and I say, I still will not watch another Viacom program. No CBS, no MTV, no country music station, no any of that, because they need to understand, just like how the backlash was swift on Nick Cannon to take away his livelihood, we need to show the support against people like Viacom to be swift to take away their livelihood, to show you that, yes, we understand that he made some misguided comments, but that's not the point. We will not allow political pressure to cause us to continue to fold because we're trying to open up conversation about love, a conversation about bringing forth information. I just want to say this. I would consider it just as much as a hate speech that they say is hate when Nick Cannon said the children of black people, the children of Israel were black. I would say that it's just as much hate speech when you try to deny a whole community and group of people who want to let you know that, yes, the Bible, which speaks for itself, does speak of the children of Israel being the melanated, darker skinned people. And the fact that you try to shut that down through financial means, I say that's just as much hate speech, if not worse, because you put in actions to supplement the information that you're trying to suppress.
So now just changing gears a little bit, but based on what Zakar Benjan just said, in terms of equity, and then at the same time he's talking about protesting. So now I'll ask to Chief Nasty Bandan. I know you're an NBA fan. I believe you're a Knicks fan. You might have switched over recently when the Nets moved to Brooklyn. You're Brooklyn born, but the NBA now, they're starting their season back. They're in their bubble. Some of the players didn't want to go back, but overall, the majority ruled. But those that wanted to go back, they still wanted to show some form of protest while playing based on the climate that's happening now. However, the NBA only allowed them 29 slogans that they could put on their jerseys. You know, some of those such as being "I can't breathe," you know, things like that, that they were allowed to have, but they only gave them 29 slogans that they allowed to, quote unquote, promote in their protests of what's going on. Do you think that that's an equitable compromise for the NBA players to only be limited to what the NBA is telling them on how they can protest?
So I thought about this long and hard, and in one aspect, I think that it's bad to tell grown men who have minds of their own how to express themselves. But I do sometimes look at the management, right, of how some people, of everybody wants to say something, how do we manage that process? I think that by saying 29, like, you know, you can do it, but you have to do it. You have to pick from this lot. And it seems that's a culture, part of that cancel culture that we're just discussing, that we're being confined to how we are able to express ourselves. And I have a big problem with that. I have a big problem with that because the NBA as an organization, throughout the years, they haven't been the best regarding how the players should be able to be free and express themselves. You know, they tried to confine Allen Iverson because, you know, at one time, you know, he came out and he was dressing what they call hip hop style, and he had tattoos or what have you. But, you know, that didn't interfere with his game. I think sometimes they appeal to things that are not in essence of the majority of the people that watch the game and the players that play the game. So the problem that I have the most is that they don't take into consideration the feelings of the people who are being marginalized, which are the players. So that conversation needed to be had with the players. It shouldn't be a thing where the NBA hammers down and says, okay, we're gonna let you guys do it, but you only have 29 statements that you can actually make. I think that's preposterous. But I do think that conversation, which probably didn't happen, a conversation needs to be had with the players so that they can come to a fair agreement on what can be said or what should be said. So I personally think that it's still a level of censorship. It's still a level of confinement. It's still a level of suppressing their expression as players. And I think that if they want to say something, even if it's somewhat provocative, if it's not vulgar, the only thing I can think of if it's something that's vulgar, but if it's provocative, but it's an alarming, but if it's truth, they should have the freedom to be able to express themselves. And this is part of why these statements are being made by Ice Cube and these statements are being made by Nick Cannon and other people, because there seems to be this level of control over how we are able to express ourselves when we are part of these institutions that make billions of dollars and we see pennies as players from those billions of dollars.
So now dealing with the dollars and cents matter, as you just mentioned. So I'm gonna ask this to Rabbi Shlomo. Same thing in regards to the NBA. They're only allowing, I don't know how big of a sports fan you are, but I'll just tell you some of the slogans that they are allowing, along with I can't breathe, justice, peace, equity, power to the people, justice now, say her name. Of course, in regards to Sandra Bland, Breonna Taylor, of course, love us, listen to us, stand up, speak up. How many more? Education reform. Those are just some of the slogans that they're allowing the NBA players to put in their jerseys. But now in the dollars and cents conversation, who is really benefiting from that? Because, the NBA is mostly Black. We know that. But the jerseys are being produced by companies that are going to have these slogans on it that are going to be sold, worldwide. So now with the dollars and cents, where's this money going, and where do you feel the money should be going from the jerseys that have these slogans on it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think I'm going to try to tie all these things together. I think Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, arguably the greatest basketball player who ever lived, right? Not only in terms of scoring points, but in taking principal positions during his life, as when he was an active player, right? About Black athletes speaking out, right? Him, Muhammad Ali, when they held that press conference coming to his support and aid, right? So he's been a man of principle throughout. So when he came out, and saying, where's the outrage, speaking to Ice Cube, right? In that article about, I stood up when Black people are victims of racism, I speak out, right? And when I see someone else being the victim of some kind of racism, anti-Semitism, I speak out. And so he was calling out, where are the other people in the Black community who normally you would expect to speak out who didn't? Also, Charles Barkley, he came out on this. But it's important because we are making a moral argument, right? Our whole argument is based on justice. And this is why I think these charges of anti-Semitism are being brought up. I mean, what is the motive, right? What are our enemies trying to do by bringing this up? And I think what they're trying to do is to discredit us, right? To say we're making a moral claim, we're calling out racism. And so now they want to say, basically, by bringing up these examples, Black people are racist too, right? So you calling me a racist, right? For, murdering George Floyd, for 400 years of slavery and segregation. You want to tear down my statues because we say that those Confederate officers were racist and slave owners and their statues should come down. And now they're trying to turn the tables on us and say, you got racists in the Black community, right? And so therefore you can't criticize us, right? Because of these examples. So we have to be very careful, right? And this is why when you're the one making the moral argument, then you have to try to live by those very same principles and standards of justice that you're trying to hold another group of people to, right? Now, if you abandon all those standards and you just say it's about power, just raw, naked power, not about justice, not about morality, then without morality and justice, you have no claim as to why these people shouldn't have power and why you should have more power, right? Our whole claim is based on morality and justice, right? And so therefore that has to apply to everyone. And although that's a political analysis, again, what's different about our conversation from the other conversation I've heard on this subject is we approach it from a scriptural point of view, right? And what the scripture tells us, and again, it's going to be two verses here, in Genesis, starting at the beginning, right? It says, this is Genesis 1, verse 27. Vayivra Elohim et ha'adam betzalmo, betzelem Elohim bara oto, zakar unekeva bara otam. So God said, let us make man in our image. In the image of God, made he male and female. Okay, this is our Torah, right? Other people can claim it, read it, right? And this is how it begins by saying God made all human beings in the image of God, Beit Salmo, in his image. Zakar unekeva, male and female, right? And these were not Israelites, they were not Hebrews. Hebrews were not coming, as we know, until the time of Abraham, right? But God is laying a foundation that all people are created in the image of God. And so therefore you should never look at a person and say there's something wrong with the way God created them because of the color of their skin, as I said earlier, right? This whole melanin, stuff, melanin is a hormone in the body, like insulin, like estrogen, like testosterone, right? except you can't see it, but it's important. I mean, we could demystify it, right? Most other animals either covered with hair or feathers, right? But you have to have some protection from the sun. So what God in creating man, and that's why we're different from apes or monkeys, right? We don't have hair all over our bodies, but we have a hormone in our skin that allows it to darken to protect us from the harmful rays of the sun, right? That's what its purpose is. Every healthy person, white people have melanin, right? This is why in the summertime, when they're exposed to more sun, their bodies produce more melanin and they tan, right? So don't fall into the trap of saying, that the way you behave is because of your skin. It's what's in your mind and what's in your heart, right? And that's what we judge, what you do, right? So when I criticize and I talk about racism, I'm talking about what people do and what they have done, right? And if you say, well, my skin made me do it, no, right? You did it for economic reasons, you did it for political reasons, as the motive. And so this is why, when the connection between all of these things, when we say take down these statues, they can't respond and say, well, yeah, they were racist, but everybody's racist, so we should allow these statues to stand, right? I'm trying to be morally consistent and say, well, you have freedom of speech. If you want to fly a Confederate flag in your house, you can decorate your home however you want, but you shouldn't force me in public spaces to have to look at it, watch it, or honor it when you put it up as a monument statue to be honored. In public space, we all have to agree on what's in our public space. In our private space, you're free to have any statue, idol, artwork that you want in your own home, right? But in our public space, then we have a right to say no, right? And
I just want to, not cut you out, but I just want to shoot this back over to Maury Yiftach. As you mentioned, displaying things in public. So now with the NBA once again allowing the players to only have certain statements that they're displaying in public. And I'm going to connect this to a statement that was actually put in the chat room just now. Is just having slogans on a jersey, is that enough of a statement? And then I'll add to that, will these acts inspire any type of change?
Yes, absolutely, undeniably, beyond a shadow of a doubt. Of course they will inspire change. Why? Because it's their platform. The people who idolize them, using the term idolize loosely, the people who are their fans are looking at how they move, looking at how they act, and eventually that behavior will be emulated. When Tommy Smith and I believe it was John Carlos in the 1968 Olympics stopped and raised their fist in solidarity during that Olympics, it inspired individuals such as myself, who was not even born during that period, to stop and say, it's okay to be Black. When you had James Brown stopping and saying, I'm Black and I'm proud, it made individuals such as myself, who was not even born at the time that the song was released, to stop and say, it's okay to embrace my quote on. So when we stop and we see Colin Kaepernick in 2017 kneeling during the national anthem, it invokes that same spirit that Tommy Smith and John Carlos had during the 1968 Olympics, to stop and say, yes, we should stand up against social injustices. And so as George Floyd was just killed in 2020, and as we watched in horror and in amazement in 2020, was somebody who could actually do that to a person based on their race, then yes, it will inspire athletes in the future. It will inspire not only other athletes, but also other aspiring athletes and those who watch them to stop and say, I need to speak out against social injustice. And so, yes, that needs to happen. Those slogans need to happen. Those players should not be censored in what they want to say. They should what should rather happen is they should stop and submit their slogans that they want in their jersey and have it reviewed by a committee, a neutral committee for the NBA that stops and says, is this okay to sport on their jersey? And in that way, it can individualize it for each person according to their fans. And actually, it will be a win for the NBA because that may actually promote the sale of that jersey. But unfortunately, the climate that we live in, as my brother Chief Naphtali just said, they want to control the narrative. They want to control what can be said. They want to control how it should be said. And so now let me say this. As we stop and we look at our change, I want us to understand, this is not just an issue of the offenders. This is an issue of the family and the friends of the offenders. This is an issue of them protecting certain people throughout this country, through this cancel culture. Ahmaud Arbery, the amazing part of all of this, as we watched the video and we watched as we had another 2020 lynching, they hunted this man down while he was jogging. They shot and he killed him. There was a whole department that protected him for over 30 days. And nobody's talking about this. But what did they use? They cleverly disguised their language and said, oh, there were certain people that needed to be recused because of their relationship to the McMichaels. That's a problem. I have a problem with those people, and I have a problem with the people who protect them. And I say it's a long, systemic issue within this country that for us, when it is perceived racism, when it is perceived hate, we are canceled immediately. It is not us speaking up for ourselves, for our culture, and for our identity. When it's vice versa, oh, we need to stop and take a second to think about this. And so what I say is keep putting your slogans on your jersey, keep using your platform to promote your quote unquote blackness, but ultimately make sure that you don't let anybody silence you about your culture.
As we begin to wrap up at this point, this one that asks Zakar Bendan, because the Black Lives Matter movement is something that basically came up recently in the past few years. Of course, the problem that we face as a Black community has been going on for hundreds of years. But when the recent protests have been happening in the past few years, everybody's been looking at the Black Lives movement. So now the question to you is, as a community, as the Black community, should we have a collective strategy to actually bring forth these changes?
Yes. So I think when we're looking at this, we as a community we're not new to struggle. We're not new to these different factions and groups coming up. The thing about Black Lives Matter is right now, Black Lives Matter is the prominent movement. It's the one that's gaining the most support. Black Lives Matter the slogan was painted on the road directly to the White House. I applaud the mayor of DC for that. Black Lives Matter, that was painted right in front of the Trump Towers. I applaud the mayor for doing that. While that is the most prominent group that we have now, we need to take a look at how this compares to what happened in the 60s. Because what happened in the 60s is that Martin Luther King, Dr. King, his movement was the prominent movement. That didn't mean that there were not other movements that were also occurring at the same time. The unfortunate part about what happens is we had movements like Dr. King's movement. We had the Nation of Islam and what was being Malcolm X. We also had the various movements and groups that were going on in those smaller states and pushing to get people to vote and pushing for voter reform and so on and so forth. So Black Lives Matter now is equivalent to the Dr. King movement in the 60s. What we need to do now is to be different, is now we need to take Black Lives Matter. And we need to take the National Action Network. We need to take the various platforms that us as Hebrew Israelites, God's people, that we're putting forth. We need to take the NAACP is still out there. And all of these groups now, we need to come together, because what has been effective from the 1900s until now, we were able to come forth in Tulsa, Oklahoma, because we were together. They realized that that was the problem, and so they started to do different things to separate us. So now the people from Black Lives Matter, they need to come and they need to sit down at the table. Us as those from the Hebrew Israelite leadership, we need to come and sit at the table with Black Lives Matter, with with Mr. Sharpton's National Action Network. And we all need to come together so that our collective voice can be heard, because our collective voice will be more powerful when it's together rather than a group faction over here and a group faction over there. So I say that to say, go back to my conversation about support. We need to support each other. One thing that I do want to touch on is this concept of racism and what racism actually means. Because if you look at the definition of racism, you'll see that, and I want to choose my words carefully because I don't want it to be taken out of context. It's very difficult for minorities to be racist, because that almost goes against what the definition of racism is. And I'm trying to choose my words carefully because I don't want it to be taken out of context. But one of the things that I will say is, as we're looking to gather together, as we're looking to support each other, as we're looking to come together, I want to kind of just quote the Old Testament in Isaiah chapter 51, verse 7. And one of the things that he said is, he said, for those who follow Torah, do not fear the taunts of men, nor be dismayed at their insults. What does that mean? That means, of course, for us to say now that that Hebrew Israelites are Black and we are Hebrew Israelites and we speak Hebrew and so on and so forth, that's going to be an anomaly, because that's not something that the world has been used to for the last however long. Guess what? Don't fear their insults. Don't be afraid of their taunts, because we need to stand up for who we are, support who we are. And once we stand up and support it and say it, we need to speak it clearly. We need to speak it effectively in a manner that they can't come back to say, well, this was racist, or this was anti-Semitic, or this is hate talk. We need to speak it clearly, bring it forth, and act accordingly.
So for Chief Naftali Bendan, as also Carl Bendan mentioned, a lot of groups that have their agendas or their goals. Is there an actual goal overall for the Black community? Is there one goal that's out there, or do you think that everybody's really out there for their own agenda?
I'm gonna just be frank with you. God is gathering a remnant, and even in that remnant, what I do see is I have friends that are Christian Muslims who are thinking on a focused manner, and just like Samal Zakar said, he's not watching CBS, Viacom, MTV, and there are a lot of people who are thinking in that same vein. There are people right now who haven't watched a football game since they banned Colin Kaepernick. There are people right now who are taking their money out of white banks and putting it into Black banks. Right now, I'm actually working with people to give them ideas on starting food co-ops. The reason why is because we have a problem when at any time we say something that people deem offensive. It may not be offensive, but people may deem it offensive, and then we're cut off. We can't shop, we can't eat, we can't go to the store. So we have to be on a level where we can do better for ourselves. We need to have more investment in us and more divestment out of other communities, out of other financial systems, so that we can hold ourselves strong. Part of the issue, I think Master P said it, he said the problem that he had with Nick Cannon apologizing, it shows that we don't have enough power of our own to say what we need to say when it's time for us to say it. We are controlled by a system that if we don't say or we don't play right, then we're going to starve. And if you know anything about slave culture, that was part of slave culture. Slave punishment was if you didn't pick enough cotton, if you didn't do what master wanted you to do, then you didn't get rations. And we want to get out of that thought pattern. We wanted to get out of that practice, and we want to get out of that racism. And I don't subscribe to Merriam-Webster's definition of racism, because I look at racism as a means of control. And if we don't have the control to do anything to another people, we may be prejudiced, but I don't have the power to impact you the way you impact my life. So we have to look at that definition very deeply. So I would say that there is a movement. There's a movement of individuals who are looking to defend themselves in a better manner because they don't want to be random victims of attack. There are movements of people who are looking to pull their money together so they can get proper housing, not rely on the government for anything, Democrat or Republican, it doesn't matter. We're still victims of them both. There are people who are looking to do more to bring greater solidarity, especially socioeconomic solidarity, to the Black community. But this is not for everybody. I think there's still a lot of people out there that they still want to party, they still want to do what they want to do. I get it, but there are, as I said, God is gathering his remnant, and there are people who are focused on trying to make this community stronger because they see that based on the fact that we don't have the level of solidarity that we need to have, we become victims. And we want to make sure that we are not victimized anymore. We want to make sure that we're together. That the Tulsa was not an experiment, it was actually a success. That's why it was attacked. It was something that people, the men that founded Tulsa, they had opposing point of view. So it doesn't matter if you're a conservative or liberal by your political standards. That didn't mean anything. I think one was a supporter of W.E.B. Du Bois and another was a supporter of Booker T. Washington. But they knew that the greater picture was Black solidarity, Black socioeconomic solidarity. And they came together and was able to form a so much successful. They said that money in Tulsa went around 36 times before it went outside of the community. That's how successful Tulsa was economically. So we want to make sure that we have that same focus and that same thought. And yes, there are people in the community right now. There's some of them that are right now talking to you right now that are very focused on making sure that we have a greater level of social economic solidarity. And we're not going to just stop here. We're going to push it on to the next generation. But sadly to say, there's some people that are not focused in that manner. So we're going to try to do our best to make sure that everybody gets on board.
Definitely want to thank all of you for taking time out of your day to be a part of this forum.
Good.
And I definitely appreciate it. I know that everybody was listening out there. There are people in the chat, definitely appreciate the comments that were made. And we all appreciate everybody that was out there listening as well. Just want to shout out on Ruth Woods. She's been very active in the chat room. And I just don't want to pick out one person, but she's been very active in the chat. But there's many people that's been watching. Also want to shout out to Jemani Williams, who stepped in a while ago, and of course, so we could definitely hopefully we were able to inspire him, as he's definitely inspired us. So we definitely want to link up with him in the future to discuss some of these issues. But definitely going back to the panel, thanking all of you for taking time out and for all of your responses, and definitely praying that the Most High God will continue to bless all of your efforts. It's, as all of you have mentioned, it goes beyond your speaking. I know many of you are active in the community. Many of you have things going on personally to try to effectuate change in the community. So as we wrap up,
can I make one closing remark?
Yeah, that's what I was gonna give everybody.
Oh, everybody, okay, good.
I was just gonna give everybody a minute or less. Once again, to you can state your name and give any contact information that you want to provide, so people can contact you, as well as letting everybody know how you're able to help them and how they are able to help your movement. So once again, just going around the room, 1 minute or less. I'll start with Rabbi Shlomo.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank those who were listening and those who will be watching later. Rather than make a speech or real formal closing remarks, I want to suggest some books. that I think people should read, because we never have enough time. And hopefully you will, read and study more about these things. First of all, study the Torah. That is the foundation of everything that we said here. I mean, I've been coming tonight mostly from the book of Genesis, which is the first book, right? And in that book, it says why God chose us. A lot of people have been talking about us, about Hebrews and Israelites who are not Israelites. But those of us who are, we are the chosen people. And the question to ask ourselves is, for what reason did God choose us? And he says, Le'ur goyim, liyo ur legoyim, to be a light unto the nations. That's what we were chosen to do. So yes, there's a double standard about some people say racist things and don't get fired, and then other people say anti-Semitic things and they do get fired, right? So there is a double standard. But for us as Hebrews, we were chosen to be the light. We're supposed to be a light to them. We're supposed to be setting the example, right? So we can't do everything they do. They could do things and get away with it. They could say anti-Semitic things and racist things, get away with it. You are chosen to set an example for them. And if you do not accept your birthright and your identity and the burden and responsibility that comes with being an Israelite, then you are not fulfilling your destiny. Now, as far as books that I recommend that you read, I'll go first to a book by Dr. Ibrahim Kendi. He is one of the leading young Black intellectuals today, a graduate of the African American Studies program out at Temple University. And he has a new book out called How to Be an Anti-Racist. And I strongly recommend this to you because he has a whole chapter explaining how and why Black people certainly can be racist. There was a theory, Black people can't be racist. Deshaun Jackson and Professor Grip said, because the original Jews were Semitic people and Black, therefore Black people can't be anti-Semitic. And he deconstructs and explains why that really doesn't make logical sense in his books. I would get it and read it and discuss it. Another one is Martin Luther King. Everybody knows him and have heard his speeches, but I noticed very few people actually read his books. He wrote 4 books before he was assassinated at the age of 39. And his first book was called Why We Can't Wait. Why We Can't Wait. And he has an essay that he wrote in there called The Letter from the Birmingham Jail. And he's writing this letter from prison. And he says that there are 4 steps that people who are engaged in civil disobedience need to go through. First, you have to check the facts and make sure racism exists. You have to try to negotiate. Then you have to undergo self-purification. And then fourthly, you can engage in action, right? So that third stage of self-purification is important and spiritual to say those of us who are engaged in moral struggles, we have to purify ourselves. We have to put on the armor of God, and we have to be purified to go out and do the struggle. And lastly is the autobiography of Malcolm X. This is a classic, but there are 2 passages in this book that's relevant to our discussion tonight. The one where Malcolm is in prison and the chaplain of the prison, he has a debate with them, and Malcolm says, I said I wasn't going to read. He said, I stood up and asked, what color was Paul? And I kept talking with a pause. He had to be Black because he was a Hebrew, and the original Hebrews were Black. And when Malcolm said this in prison to the prison chaplain, he said the prison chaplain could not respond. He couldn't refute. He couldn't deny anything he said. But then later he joins the Nation of Islam, and I'm not going to read that. And he says the Nation of Islam taught him that white people were created by a Black scientist by the name of Yaqub on an island of Putmos, where he blended a cat, a rat, and a dog, and he made white people. Malcolm said, later I learned that none of that stuff, none of that racist stuff is actually in the Quran. None of that was actually taught by the Prophet Muhammad, right? And so the part that was true is what he said about Hebrews. The racist part, he said, was the stuff, all this other racist stuff. And this is one of the reasons why he then left the Nation of Islam and practiced a truer form of Islam. And so the same lesson for us as Hebrew Israelites, we need to practice a true Israelite culture and history, right? And not get sidetracked or allow us or other people to misuse and abuse our faith, our tradition, and our culture. And I'll leave you with just those 3 books there.
We thank you for that to Rabbi Shlomo. So once again, that's Rabbi Shlomo, president of the International Board of Rabbis. There were questions about the books that he mentioned. We'll get that list, and as you know, because this video is going to be up, and then it's also going to be posted on YouTube at some point. And along with the edited version of the video, we should be able to add the list of books. So people are asking for that list of books. So we definitely want to provide that list of books. As you can see behind Rabbi Shlomo, he had many books. So he mentioned 3 of them. But you can see he has 137 behind him. So he gave you 3 out of that list. So I'm moving over to Zakar Ben-Dan for your closing statements, any contact information that you want to provide as well.
Thank God, because God is King. I thank him for your lives. I thank you all for coming on and taking the time to listen to us. Basically, what I just want you to know, we have a variety of different websites and venues that we're on, and we will be loading those up onto the Amzadik webpage. We will also be loading them onto the video for those who want to watch the video later. You can find some of our teachings or our conversations or some of our goals on the Amzadik page, on the Shomrei Habrit webpage. We are also preparing a couple of other web pages before these shores, which represents where we're compiling research on who we were as Black people before slavery. There's a famous quote that says, slavery isn't the beginning of African history, it just interrupted it. So those are just a couple of websites that we will download onto the Amzadik webpage. Also, BEIT DCB, BEIT DCB.org. If you look up our YouTube page, if you look up our website, and a variety of different websites and different things that we're doing, we encourage you to reach out to us, because our goal is to build. Our goal is to educate and also to be educated, because the bottom line of it is, and I believe my brother Chief Naftali Ben-Dan mentioned it earlier, we can't continue in this vein of anytime someone gets mad at us, they want to fall out, and now they take our financial backing and now we're stuck. We need to make our own financial backing. We need to make our own financial opportunities that represent us, because we're the only ones that's going to be able to do it for us, because history has clearly shown that we're the only ones that care about us enough to stand up strong and firm, locked arm in arm with each other to make this change. And that's the only way that we're going to make this change, together with the blessings and the guidance of the creator of the universe, the Almighty God.
Now I'll turn it over to Maury Yiftach Ben-Dan for your final statements.
Yeah, peace and blessings, everyone, once again. I want to thank everybody that took the time out to join us for this discussion, this very important discussion. I want to thank the panelists for joining me in everything that we're doing here, because we need to give this information to people. For those who's looking to contact me, you can find me on Facebook or one of the multiple platforms I'm on. You can find me as Maury Yiftach, as stated on the screen, the first 2 letters, or Yiftach Don. And from there, you can find all the different information about what I'm about, where I am on Twitter, on Instagram, and also at shomreihabrit.com. I want to say this as we close out, because the name of this program was Cancel Culture. Is it part of our rise, or is it part of our demise? What I'm going to tell you is, never let anybody silence you. What's happening in the world today is part of the spiritual warfare that we find ourselves in, with ourselves, with our God, and with people in the world. The reality is that they have been silencing us for quite some time now. Marcus Mosiah Garvey was silenced by this government, even though he promoted Pan-Africanism. Nothing racist about it, He was just saying black people should support black people, and the continent of Africa should be for black people, which is where we came from. He was silenced. Malcolm X, we know the story. He was silenced. Martin Luther King, he was silenced. The Black Panther Party, and they promoted self-defense. You see, they changed the narrative, and the entire party was silenced. So where do we find ourselves in 2020? Well, if we read the book of Ezekiel, chapter 37, we see that the Most High God posed the proverbial question to the prophet, Son of man, can these bones yet live? And I say for us in these days and times, we are that valley of dry bones. If you take the time to read the chapter, we are trying to get ourselves together piece by piece, bone by bone, sinew to sinew. We are waiting for God to put the flesh back on these bones so that we can be whole once again. Part of understanding that is understanding our role and what we have to do, not only to build ourselves, but to build one another. And for us to be whole once again, we must learn how to do business with one another. We must learn how to serve God with one another. And we must learn how to respect one another once again. And in order for that to happen, we have to do that without interference from anybody else. And when I say without interference from anybody else, that's whether you're black, whether you're white, yellow, green, or purple. If anybody is against your cause, you need to separate those people out your circle so that you can build and grow. And for us to build and grow here in this society, the things that we see that are wrong, we must learn to speak out against. If they want us to be part of this nation and part of this community, then they have to learn to respect you as a human being, not just as a black man, as a human being that has civil rights the same way that they do, the same human rights that they have. And when that happens, we can learn to exist in this world as God gave it to us all. With that being said, I hope that you guys enjoyed what we have, what we're experiencing, and I say peace and blessings to you all. Thank you for having me.
And finally, Chief Nathalie Bendan, for your final thoughts.
Hallelujah. Thanking the Most High for all things and everything. I want to thank him for allowing this to come through. I think this is going to be the first of many, and I hope that the next one can be all of the panelists here. Thank you, Rabbi Shalomo. Thank you, my brother Zakar Ben Dan. Thank you, Maury Yiftach Ben Dan. Thank you, Binyana, for doing an excellent job moderating. So I would like to say, I suggest 2 more books on top of what Rabbi Shalomo suggested. Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome by Joy DeGruy. I think that gives us a very strong context behind the institution of America and their practices of racism and how we got to this point now. And it's a must read, and I think another must read is The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. Another strong level of context towards the institution of racism in this country, how we got this far, and how they were exploiting us with the jail system, the prison industrial complex, and the justice system in America. It gives a lot of backdrop to why we're dealing with situations with George Floyd and what have you now. I would just like to say that to everyone in the audience, thank you for participating and watching. But the aim of this is to take the information and run with it, to be able to move, to be able to join something that's positive, to be able to support and put pressure on local politicians to do what's right for the community. I think that we need to have the right pushes to make sure that we are socioeconomically self-sufficient as a people, and that we are no longer held to being anybody's puppets. We need to be able to move in a fashion where we're able to be strong. And, there's nothing wrong with making mistakes. Mistakes are not the issue. I think the issue is that when we make mistakes, that we are not allowed to reconcile, that we have to be cut off because we are living in a system of dependence. So we have to make sure that we can be free. And you're not free unless you're socially, economically free. You're not free unless you're mentally free. And you're not free unless you're spiritually free. I advise that all of us be able to look within ourselves, our spirituality, pray more and do more, because without the invocation of God in our lives, every battle that we have will be lost. And I think we need to be able to exercise our ability to invoke God's presence in the things that we do in each and every day. Hallelujah.
So once again, thanking you all for being a part of the panel. Once again, thanking everybody out there that was listening. And once again, once this video closes on Facebook, we still encourage everyone to share. Invite your friends to continue to watch this video over and over again. And once, it gets posted in other forums such as YouTube, we, encourage everybody to share it as well. And invite everybody to continue to watch this video. It was very informative. Like I said, people out there in the chat appreciated it. Ruth herself said that, she's hoping that this can happen once a week. We don't know how, we can schedule that, but we thank her for, listening once again, and thanking everybody for listening on this program this evening here in New York City.
And I usually don't cut you off. Can you just suggest to them that they submit their topic suggestions for these things?
Okay. Yeah, so anybody in the chat room before, because we're about to close out soon, you can post any topic suggestions, or you can contact any of the panel members with your topic suggestions as well. Just referring back to Rabbi Shlomo, as he was quoting certain scriptures, and you heard him read in a different language. Just want to let people know that that's the Hebrew language. So he mentioned earlier that as Nick Cannon mentioned, that the original Hebrews, the original Israelites were Black, is basically a means of returning back to the culture, being able to speak the language of the culture of the people that spoke it originally. So for those that may have been thrown off with the language change, Rabbi Shlomo would read certain things, and some of the other panel members as well. That was the Hebrew language that he was reading. So once again, just thanking the panel members and continuing to that they continue on with their work. And for everybody that took time out to listen, we know that you're listening because you have something within you that inspired you to listen, and there's probably or most likely something in your lives that you're inspired to do anyway. And this was just something to augment that change that you're trying to affect, whether it's locally or whether it's nationally. So once again, we do encourage everyone to continue to participate, look out for forums such as this. Once again, as they mentioned, follow the Sadiq page on Facebook, YouTube, the Debate DCB page, the International Board of Rabbis page, which you can actually find via blackjews.org. There's various resources out there. In terms of the books, we'll get the list of books that both Rabbi Shlomo and Chief Naftali Ben Dan mentioned. And probably one of our weekly things that we can do is probably a book club on some of those books. That's something that we could talk about offline as well. And those that may be interested could probably encourage that as well. So once again, thanking you all, the panel, and all of those that are listening. And until we see each other again, just saying God bless.